Every living thing needs water to survive, so a surefire way of attracting wildlife into your garden is to build a pond. Now, if your garden's very small, the pond can be small too, so I'm going to make one out of my old dustbin. They're very easy to cut off with a hacksaw, but you need to get the top straight, of course. So what I did was to measure up from the bottom to the top here, all the way round, and then put a piece of tape on to give me a dead straight line, and then I just cut it off with the saw. And then the pond goes in the hole. It's important to put it in a hole because that will keep the water cool and clear from green algae. Now, obviously, you need to get it level because water will, of course, find its own level all the time. So level it in with a spirit level first of all. And check it both ways. That's about right. Now, when you come to fill in the soil around the sides, bear in mind that the plastic is really quite flimsy, and it will be very easy to distort the shape of the pond as you're backfilling. So what you need to do is to fill up the pond with water as you're putting in the soil. And it's exactly the same story if you've bought one of those preformed plastic ponds from the garden centre. Right, now you put a little bit of soil in the bottom of the pond, which will be a nice environment for any plants you've got. And the first thing that you need is oxygenating weed. This will help to keep the water clear. Now, normally with big ponds, you tie a weight on the bottom and throw it in, but with a little one like this, well, you can just push it into the soil at the bottom. And then, very importantly, you need one plant in a pot at the side. And since the top of the pot should come just below water level, you might need a couple of bricks in the bottom there. And in the top of the pot, just put a few stones. This is just to hold the soil in. And the whole thing acts as a step so that any animals that are foolish enough to fall in will easily be able to get out of there. And very shortly that water will clear completely and the pond will be very attractive. Now, you're going to want to plant plants around the pond, but do bear in mind that this soil is not actually moist at all, it's bone dry. So what you need are plants that look as though they could be bog garden plants, but aren't. Things like the lovely bleeding heart, for example, or Corydallis with superb blue flowers, or very appropriately, Angel's fishing rods. Now, in the summer, that's going to look splendid. Now, you remember that little pond that I made the other week out of half a dustbin? Well, when I left, it was pretty murky, but now it's gone as clear as a bell because there's a little bit of oxygenating weed in the bottom, the mud has settled, and the iris is settling in quite nicely. And now what I want to do is plant a water lily. Now, you may think that a little pond 18 inches across is too small for a full-size lily. Well, it is really, but there are some varieties that would do very well. This one, for example, is called Leidekeri, and the Pygmaea varieties are also very good too. Now, this is the way that it will come to you, and you can see that the leaves on here are really pretty tatty, and quite honestly, they've had it. So the first job is simply to cut those off. Now, you'll remember that I put some soil in the bottom of the pond when I made it, so all you've got to do now, quite honestly, is simply to push it into the soil at the bottom, where that'll root, and soon the leaves will come right up to the top, and of course the flowers as well.
of these varieties are old established ones. James Bryden here is very popular with garden pond keepers because it produces a lot of flowers and not very many leaves. Last year this particular one had a flower on it for every day of the summer. This one is Meteor. It was created by Marliak in 1909. My father's favourite water lily, basically because it is so profuse in flowering, he loves the colour of it. Marliak was a Frenchman that lived in the Lot Valley in France at the turn of the century. He created most of the hybrid water lilies that have been available up till now. He couldn't pollinate them or cross-pollinate them to get more hybrids from them, so he believed they were sterile, and that belief has been held up to now. We find that there is no actual sterile water lily. Some are more difficult to breed from than others, but there is no actual sterility in the water lilies. In America, they can sow a seed in the spring and have it flowering by late summer. Over here, it takes 3 to 4 years from sowing the fertile seed to when it actually starts to produce flowers. The best way we've found of growing them is in a totally encapsulated form, like a washing up bowl or bucket. They are sun lovers and they are heavy feeders. We feed them by putting well-rotted cow manure into the bottom of the barrel, and then good heavy loam, topsoil, and the top 2-3 inches of the barrel as sharp sand. And the sun warms the sharp sand up so much quicker than it would warm up soil. When you want to propagate, what you do is either cut or snap the offsets off of the rhizome, like that, and then you repot that into fresh soil into a small pot. This one you then replant into fresh soil into a bucket or container by just burying the roots and then putting sand all the way around to bring the soil up to level. There's basically a lily for every pond.
Now, the Great Stream project continues. You'll remember that last week I finished off the stream and the pond, and I actually got the water moving too. And the sound of running water in the garden really does make a difference. I love it. And what I wanted to do then was to surround the water with bog gardens specially designed for different sorts of plants. Now that also involves excavating, of course, but here you're not actually trying to contain the water, but just to impede the drainage. So I could line it much more cheaply with old compost bags. And even then, I still pricked holes in the bottom just to make sure that stagnant water didn't hang about. And then I refilled with soil liberally mixed with farmyard manure, again to hold moisture, and I was ready for planting. Now, you may remember during the course of construction that there was a blooming great hole here, and that was designed especially for this plant. It's Gunnera manicata, the giant rhubarb, and it'll grow, 9 or 10 feet high, with absolutely huge leaves, provided it's got enough root room. So the hole was dug, 3 foot deep by about 8 foot across, and it certainly should be happy in that. We'll get him in there. The great thing about these aquatic plants is that once they're planted, they really get away fast because the conditions are absolutely right for them. Now, the bit of bog garden over here is much shallower. That's no more than 9 inches to a foot deep. And that's designed for shallower rooting plants like the primulas here and the trollius and the astilbes. But it's planting the pond that really brings out the 11-year-old in me. Now, you can probably see that the water looks a bit pea soupish at the moment, and that's because it hasn't got any of this stuff in it. This is oxygenating weed, which will provide oxygen in the water and make it become clear again. And all you've got to do with this is to tie it to a stone and throw it in. And that will soon root into the bottom and grow away like mad. With marginal plants, the first thing to do is to find out what sort of depth of water they require, because it does vary quite a bit. Things like this rush, for example, want to grow under about a foot of water. So you push that in there, into the mud, like that. And that will root into the bottom there and grow away quite nicely. But things like the marsh marigolds here need 2 inches or so, or they'll just grow in the mud at the side. But when it comes to planting water lilies, you're much better off to contain the roots of those in a pot. With these small mesh baskets, there's no need for a Hessian liner, so you can just put soil straight in. And I'm using ordinary garden soil, and then the lily goes on top of that. If you've got any damaged leaves like this, it's a good idea just to cut them off, because they'll die anyway. And then I like to put a big stone on the top just to hold the lily down, and then some gravel over the top of that to keep the soil in. And then it needs a good watering. Again, just to settle the soil in around the plant. And then I'm going to poke some strong string through the basket, through one side, and then down through the other side. This is so that I can lower it into the pool. Now, this is where I need some help. Can you give me a hand, Ian, please? And we should be able to get this into the pool quite easily. Now, this variety is escarbuchel, and it needs about 3 feet of water. But we're going to introduce it gradually by putting it round about a foot deep now, and when the leaves reach the surface, then we'll move it in a bit deeper. And eventually that will give me some superb flowers. But, of course, I've got to be patient. Now, I thought I had finished planting the bog garden, but then I discovered these carnivorous plants, and I think they're really beautiful. And amazingly, some of these Sarracenias are actually hardy, and they're ideal subjects for my bog garden because they must have a very moist situation. And I've got just the spots here, because what I did when I built the feature was to bring the liner right up to here. You can just see it actually poking out there. And then I built a wall of stones around the front, refilled it with soil so that these plants here will actually have their roots in water. And that's ideal for the Sarracenias. And you can see, as I dig it out, how gungy this soil is. That now can go in there. And I think that should get away nicely. And who knows, it might catch the odd greenfly or two. Well, now, when you last saw this feature, the water was quite green. But now the plants are growing and the water lilies have come to the top and are beginning to spread, then the water has started to clear. I do have the advantage that my pond is quite big and it's deep. It's small, shallow ponds where it's difficult to control the algae. But it seems that there is an organic solution at hand. A while ago, a farmer accidentally dropped some bales of barley straw into a very green pond, and in a very short time it cleared. So you townies will have to go to the country for some barley straw, but if you can find it, stuff it into a pair of old tights. You want a good wadge, so the bigger the better, and then put a lump of brick or stone or something in there just to make sure that it sinks, and then you can tie it up. Now, I've also fixed a piece of nylon string to the tights because I'm quite sure I'm going to want to be able to drag it out a bit later on, and shortly my water will be crystal clear. I'm rather pleased with the way these plants have grown. Bear in mind that I only put these in a couple of months ago as quite small plants, and the ones in the pond have done well too. The water lilies have done particularly well, and some of them are actually just coming into flower. And I tried a little experiment with these. The one over the back there with the red splodges on the leaves, I introduced exactly as the book suggests you should do, putting it gradually deeper and deeper till it reached its proper depth over a period of about 3 or 4 weeks. But these other littler ones here, I simply cut the leaves off and put them straight in at their bottom depth, and they all grew up perfectly well. But I've had tremendous problems with blanket weed, and that of course is because of the very hot weather. And the only thing to do with that is to get a stick and every now and then just put it in and wind the blanket weed round, twisting it round the stick and pulling it out. You've got to keep doing this regularly, but on a nice hot sunny summer's day, I must say I quite enjoy it. I think I've solved the green algae problem with barley straw. Now, you may remember that I was showing you this a few weeks ago, and I've now got some further information from the people who did the research. First of all, it isn't dangerous to fish, provided you use the right amount of barley straw. For a pool which is less than 10 square metres or 10 square yards, you need 100 grams of barley straw or 4 ounces. Now, if you can't buy barley straw from a local farmer, you can actually get it now, mail order, in these little squares. And they will cost you £5.80 for a package of 3, and you just throw them in like that. And I think it'll solve all your problems. John's nursery consists of a series of water-filled trenches where he grows aquatic plants for sale. And along the edges, clear of the water, he grows bog plants to create a beautiful garden. Well, John, the garden at this time of the year is looking really splendid.
Thank you very much. It's probably the best time.
The primulas are looking particularly good at the moment. And what's that yellow one in the front there?
This is Florindi, which is a sort of mop head in habit. It has a wonderful perfume and comes in a number of different colourways. This is yellow, but there are rusty oranges and reds as well.
You've got a pinkish one at the back of that too. What's
yes.
that?
This is Candelabra in form. It's a hybrid between Beesiana and Bulliana. The hybrids come under a multiplicity of very attractive marketing names like Hawaiian Holiday or Mexican tropical evening hybrids. But I normally recommend that people buy one each of the parents, Beesiana and Bulliana, and make their own. It'll happen quite naturally.
In front of you there is a mimulus, which, as far as I'm concerned, is a bit of a weed.
Yes, it certainly is. Though recommended in so many of the books, it is not a plant for small gardens, and it can be a damn nuisance.
Yeah. And things like bulrushes, too, are to be avoided.
They are. So many bog plants and marginals that are sold are, in fact, British native plants. And when released from natural competition, they can strangle the family cat in days.
Well, of course, size is a thing also that you've got to think about, but just over here is a plant everybody has got to want to grow, I should think. This wonderful gunner. It's lovely, isn't it?
It is. It's almost, I should think, possibly our largest garden plant. But sadly, for a small garden, it is not going to be suitable.
It's also a little bit tender, isn't it?
Yes. The crown should be protected with straw in the first 3 or 4 years.
Of course, the other thing that we must remember is that all these plants need a moist soil. So what do I do if I've got a well-drained soil?
You just build yourself a bog garden. The first thing we're going to need to do is move the plants. Right, well, that's more or less done that, Jeff. I think the next thing to do is to mark out shape. That looks about right. Now all we've got to do is dig it out. About 1.5 feet to 2 feet, I think.
stand there watching me do it.
Well, I'm rather enjoying that. We've now got a graduated depth. It's about 2 feet over that side and about 10 inches up here. When we put the plastic in and fill it up, which will give us a different amount of wetness, so that you can grow in this hole a wider variety of plants.
Now that looks a lovely drop of stuff.
That's well-rotted horse manure, which is the material that will really hold the moisture.
This looks like just ordinary builder's plastic, John.
Yes, it is. There won't be any deterioration due to the...
No, so you could actually use clear plastic too, and it needn't cost a fortune.
No.
So what have you chosen for the deep bit at the back, John?
Well, I've pulled out a plant that is going to need quite deep roots and quite a lot of damp. As you can see in the pot, it soon tells you when it's short of water. That's Ligularia the rocket, which is very popular, and will grow between 6 to 8 feet. Right, so if I pop that in the middle of the back, I think. Astilbes flourish in damp soil. This one is called Rembrandt, and grows about the size you see it there in the pot. But they come in shades of, from dark red through all different shades of pink, through to white. Now, in the front, in the chalet bit, I thought some of the bog primulas, which is...
have some of those.
Yes.
The one thing that you haven't got in there that really hit me in the eye when I came into your nursery are those lovely Iris insata.
Yes, the ones that used to be called Iris Kempferi.
That's right, yes.
Yes, we've got a large collection. They will grow in ordinary herbaceous conditions, provided it doesn't dry out. So if you are very, very sandy in soil, then I recommend putting in a bog garden of this sort. They are wonderful.
On the west coast of Ireland, the climate and conditions present gardeners with a rather special set of opportunities and challenges. I've come to Connemara, where Lorna McMahon has managed to carve a lush water garden out of the wild scrub and peat bogs. Tremendous primeval feel about it, hasn't it, with the mosses and twisted stems?
Yeah.
And then you emerge from the darkness into this series of sunlit rooms.
Yeah, this is half the fun of it, actually, is that you're going in and out of the woodlands.
Gosh, look at that. That's magnificent.
I went, actually, by Beth Chatter's damp garden to start with, because I'd never grown anything on bog before. So I tried to work out from her, and then by experiments, what actually light their feet solidly in water all the time.
Quite a lot of daylilies.
Yes, there's a particularly good one over here now. That's pink damask.
Oh, right.
And I like that particular one. It's actually, it comes at this time and is quite striking looking.
And they don't mind having their feet permanently in the wet?
No, they love it. They actually love it. The bog field, I had no choice. You had to grow things that like the feet in water.
That's your biggest area, isn't it, the bog garden?
Yes, I suppose it is, and it was the most daunting because it was, once you cleared it, you had a lot of clearance to do in the first place, and then you were starting off with very difficult conditions to grow on, really.
Because, I mean, peat doesn't have many nutrients, does
No.
it? So for a lot of plants, it's not a very good medium.
No, I actually have to feed. If I want things to grow well, unless it's things that don't need much feeding like heathers, you actually do have to feed practically all the time. I tried to, before I started, when I arrived first, before I killed anything off, I rescued the orchids, and the Lithrum came back anyway, and I was delighted to see its great value.
Wonderful. There's a tremendous show of colour this time of year, isn't it? How many different areas actually are there within the wood?
I think there are about 12 areas, you know, separate areas. And what I do is I try to... each area has come by for a specific reason. And I've had fun developing it, and then I move on to the next. It's terribly... it's mad, I know. This area here was like a jungle-like thicket, and it was very difficult to get your way through it.
You had to machete your way through.
Yeah, that's quite literally. And then the stream was there, but I could hear it and not actually see it.
That's a good partnership, isn't it? The hydrangea and the flame flower.
Yeah, that worked very well, actually.
Terrific annual... I mean, that's all 1 year's growth, isn't it?
Yes, and it doesn't necessarily mean it'll grow in the same place next year,
Right.
you know. It's fortuitous, really.
Imagine it's a bit of a weed, isn't it, in parts of the garden?
It is. I love it there, but there are lots of other places I could do without it, and it still is there. It'll grow only where it wants to grow, and it doesn't grow anywhere else.
How did you set about converting the bog into a garden?
I suppose what I did was I killed off all the reeds and the bog grasses and everything I didn't want, and I saved some of the plants that I did want. And then I dug drainage channels and then built my paths to try to have something to walk that you didn't sink into, basically.
Water's obviously been a sort of guiding factor, hasn't it? I mean, not just the pools and the streams, but the phenomenal rainfall that Connemara gets.
This is one thing you get to live with. I come from Dublin originally, and we have about 25 inches in Dublin. It's 72 or roughly that down here. You just get used to working in the rain, quite simply. I don't mind the rain, though, because, in fact, the rain does a lot of good to your plants, and once you get used to working in it, it's the wind is the worst factor to put up with here.
You've used the natural features very well, the rocks and the...
Well, here in particular, they actually all fit in very well. For a Japanese garden, Galway seems to have all the natural assets. We've water and moss and granite rocks and...
That's a terrific stone up there. You're really lucky with that.
I was delighted with that. There were a whole pile of things growing on it, 5 trees and holly bushes and everything. And it just, my Mount Fuji arrived when I cleared it. It was great.
Well, the garden has a very special atmosphere, Lorna. Thanks very much for showing us around.
Not at all. A pleasure. Will you have a cup of tea before
I
you go?
certainly will.